Hello, Environmental Policy 1 students. It's Dr. Conway back for a video lecture on week 1 of the course. You will know that this is part of theme 1, which is called Economy, Environment, and Technology. And the purpose of this theme is that the underlying logic of it is that we need to understand the underlying beliefs people hold about the environment, economy, and technology to understand the root causes of stakeholder positions and policy motivations in the area of the environment. What are the beliefs that people holding that help them form or direct them to form the opinions they form about the environment and its relationship to the economy and vice versa, the environment and its relationship to technology and vice versa. These are all, dominant themes that run through the argumentation of political figures, of environmental groups, of average citizens about the environment, whether the environment can be accommodated in economic development, whether technology helps us to accommodate the environment, or does it make the environmental problems worse. These dynamics run through a lot of the debates that you'll see in the press and in your readings about environmental policy. Can we continue to use the environment at the extremes that we've been using it because technology will allow us to solve the problems? Is there a way to have economic growth without significantly damaging the environment? Or does economic growth require to be slowed down or even steady state because the impacts on the environment are too great? So these are the types of issues that run through environmental debate. Regardless of where you find it, you can identify people into categories based on how they view the environment vis-a-vis the economy, how they view the environment vis-a-vis technology, and similarly how they view whether the economy can ever accommodate the environment or whether technology can ever improve the environment. These issues are always addressed in all public debates about the environment. Key concepts that have emerged to kind of come to grips with this trifecta of relationships, environment, economy, and technology, include concepts like carrying capacity, natural capital, limits to growth, steady state economy, sustainable development, which you will all have heard before, I'm sure, and ecological footprint. Each of these concepts tries to come to grips or tries to interpret their understanding of the relationship between economy, technology, and environment. For example, in carrying capacity, this concept emerged essentially out of deep ecology or environmental economics some decades ago to reflect the fact that human population growth and technological advances are exploiting the environment at a far faster rate than we had ever been able to do that in human history before. This primarily since the Industrial Revolution, but especially in the post-World War II era. We've intensified not only our population growth, but our technological extraction of natural resources. And so the concept of natural capital emerged to try to get a sense as to how fast are we depleting our natural capital to generate what we call our human-built or economic capital. And what price are we paying? Are we bankrupting natural capital in order to advance economic capital? And if so, at what rate? And at what point do we cross the line where we're just depleting natural capital so quickly that economic capital and technological advance won't be able to compensate for that? So in your readings, you'll read about the concept of carrying capacity and natural capital. The carrying capacity is highly related to the concept of natural capital because there's that concept of when do we cross the line? When do we exceed the carrying capacity of the environment? And is that line ever crossed, or does technology allow us to compensate for that? There are schools of thought out there that view these things quite differently. If you look at sort of ecologists, they would typically argue that there are limits to growth. There are limits to how much we can exploit natural capital, and in many cases, we've already exceeded the environment's carrying capacity, like in the case of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, for example. So they would argue that, in the third concept, they would argue that there are definite limits to growth, and that we need to be able to factor in those limits to growth, because technology will not help us overcome all of these environmental problems we are creating by stressing natural capital and exceeding its carrying capacity. Okay? So the ecologists would argue for what they call a steady state economy, or many would. They would argue that we need to step back from this assumption that we need to have continual economic growth. Because that continual or perpetual drive for economic growth will continue to simply exceed the limits to growth, overexploit natural capital, and exceed the carrying capacity of the environment to support the population plus our technological capacity to exploit the environment. So they come up with these concepts that try to reflect their understanding of the problems we're facing with population growth, with technology that allows us to exploit the environment to a far greater degree than we ever have before. And that with the two combined have deepened our tendency to overexploit natural capital and to exceed the carrying capacity of the natural environment. Now, on the other hand, these are the ecological perspectives. And ecologists tend to be more deeply environmental. What we call deep ecologists, or people that look at the issues from the environment out. But on the other hand, we have those that look more favorably on the adaptive or technological capacities of the human species to overcome these environmental challenges. And those views tended to be reflected in what we call the environmental movement as opposed to the ecological movement. And they look more favorably on technology, the ability of technology to help us transform away from exceeding natural capital or limits to growth and to carrying capacity. And those emerged, that concept of sustainable development, which is the fifth one that I'm talking about here, tried to incorporate this notion that the environment and the economy need to work together, that we can have economic growth that is not that doesn't continue to deepen our damage of the environment, and that we can through technology adjust to protect the environment as well as have economic growth. And that concept tended to be typified by the theme that came out of the Brundtland Commission, the concept of sustainable development. Was tried to marry the economy and the environment, tried to talk more favorably and optimistically about the ability of technology to account for our environmental problems, and tried to develop a model or a theme or a concept that allowed us to accommodate all of these things. The ecologists view this as being naive and simply surrendering to economic and population trends that are simply unsustainable. On the other hand, the environmentalists say that there's ample evidence out there that we can develop technology that will allow us to continue to have economic progress while accounting for mitigating environmental damage to a substantial degree. And you see that a lot in virtually every environmental debate that you'll see out there. You'll see which of those people fall into the ecological camp, or the deep ecology camp, or the social ecology camp, and which of those fall into the environmentalist camp, where technology is looked upon more favorably as a means to mitigate the impacts of economic growth on the environment. The ecologists, on the other hand, view that as simply a sellout to economic growth model that is simply not substantiated by the facts, because we're seeing depletion of groundwater around the world, we're seeing climate change, we're seeing loss of pollinators, bees, decline of butterflies, endangered species. They can point to all kinds of things that indicate that the environmentalist theme is simply a sellout. The environmentalists, on the other hand, can also point to a number of different themes where we have improved the environment a lot through technology, or we have mitigated damage through technology. So I guess the fundamental question becomes where do you put yourself? I mean, do you see yourself as an ecologist in the deep ecology sense, or an environmentalist in the sustainable development sense? And forming your own views can help you understand the views of others, and help you understand how macro positions emerge around the environment. Climate change, for example, of course, there's lots of people out there that saying we can come up with technology that will eliminate the burning of fossil fuels and the release of greenhouse gases. We can do it. Whereas on the ecological side, they're saying that, we simply aren't moving fast enough. There has to be a way to basically just eliminate our dependence on oil and gas. So for every position you see out there, you'll be able to identify those issues. And most of these concepts have emerged, like I said, since the Industrial Revolution, since technology and economic growth took on such a scale that we've been able to exploit the environment to degrees that we were never able to exploit it before. And that has created all kinds of these tensions, because we do see that the environment is we are reaching limits. But on the other hand, that evokes two responses. One, we have to stop. We have to stop all economic growth. The other is, no, we have to invest more into technology to basically be able to move forward with economic growth without destroying the environment. And those two macro assumptions you'll be able to find in every major discussion out there. So what I want you to do is read the readings and make sure you understand these six concepts. Or ecological footprint I didn't talk about yet, but that is essentially a way of businesses and others measuring their environmental impact on the environment. It's a tool as much as it is a concept, and it's emerged more recently. So in your readings, take a look and try to understand that concept of ecological footprint. It's a way of trying to measure your impact, but why would you do that unless you were fitting into the environmental camp as opposed to the ecological camp? There's an assumption in ecological footprint that because you can know what your environmental impact is, you can manage it through technology. Okay, so you can see with that concept, two schools of thought would come quite differently on that concept. So remember these six concepts was you're reading. One is carrying capacity. Two is natural capital. What is meant by these concepts? 3, limits to growth. 4, what do they mean by the steady state economy on the ecological side? 5, sustainable development. What do they mean by sustainable development on the environmental side? And ecological footprint, which is essentially a tool, but is also a concept about how organizations need to understand the impact they're having on the environment. And it's a set of tools as to how to measure that and what to do about it. So even though it's called ecological footprint, it tends to reside more on the environmental side of the divide on how people look at the environment. So take a look at your readings, understand those concepts, because they're key concepts for understanding where people come down on debates about the environment and environmental policy. And we'll talk to you again next week.